Today on the LadyJenevia channel, I am joined by animation editors Lawrence Gan and Ernesto Matamoros Cox, whose recent work includes the new Netflix series Arcane, which takes place in the universe of the League of Legends video game. So I find that editing is often a thankless job, and I don't think the average viewer has a sense of how important what it is that you two do and how detail oriented editing is as an art form. So, what drew each of you to getting into editing?
For me personally, it was something that really captured my attention when I was a kid. Right, I started editing in high school, and it just seemed like time would just fade away when I was editing. It is a way for, at least for me, it was a really great creative outlet. And the longer I did it, and the more I got into it, the more I realized that editing is where the movie or the show or whatever it is made, right? This is where everything gets funneled to. And it doesn't matter if you shot a beautiful music video or a beautiful show or a beautiful, this or that, and it's fantastic. If it's edited terribly, it all can fall apart. And for me, it really drew me into that, and it's been a huge creative outlet where I can express myself and come up with ideas. And it's hard sometimes as an editor to call yourself a artist, but it really is an art form.
Yeah, it's often overlooked for that very reason, because there's such a technical component behind editing. It's often intimidating for people because there is a level of sort of computer savvy that you kind of need to have now that everything's being edited on computers and not on like moviolas and film and stuff. So the art aspect of editing often gets overlooked. And in particular, I think Ernesto and I were drawn to animation editing because not only are we there to, as Ernesto was saying, to help put the movie together, so you actually see it all come together. Animation editors are actually part of the process from the very beginning. Like, we're there with the director, with the producer, as they're trying to create the story from the script. So it really is an extremely creative process, even though it has an aspect of technicality behind it.
Yeah, and a lot of times, we find in animation editing, you'll go in with a script, but the script itself isn't even locked when you go in. I've worked on projects before where I had an outline of a script and we're going into storyboards, and then the director and I are finding the story as we go, the voices of these characters, and it's way more involved. We both have a live action editing background, and we find that anytime we've shown anyone that is a live action editor our animation timeline, they just, a neck vein kind of just pops, because they can't really wrap their head around how much goes into actually animation editing. There's a huge misconception of what we do in animation, and the thought that, oh, well, you guys just get shots and you just drop them in. It's like, oh, that's a negative, ghostwriter. That is not what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm jumping to further down my list of stuff that I had written down to bring up, because I had actually looked online of just the basic Google, what is the difference between animation editing and live action editing, and what do animation editors do? And it did mention on one website that I clicked on that animation editors can end up working on a project as long as a director, or even help with the story building process before anything gets animated. So do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, insofar as how it applied to Arcane on Netflix?
Sure. I think that the animation process, there are different steps to editing animation, right? And the first step is animatic editing. And animatic is it's kind of like a blueprint to what the show is, or what the shots and what the show is going to be, or what the movie is going to be. And it's a bunch of drawings that storyboard artists, thousands and thousands of drawings that storyboard artists send to us, a lot of times just a dump of JPEGs. And it's like, okay, well, here are all these pictures, now go. And it's our responsibility to say, okay, well, Billy has to walk from that corner to that corner, and we only have 3 panels, and he's saying this, like 3 storyboard panels. How long is it going to take him to walk from here to here? Is he in a rush? Is he deliberately walking slowly? what is he saying? Where is he saying it? How do we cut the dialogue so that it works across a cut? Where do we cut? Do we use all 3 panels? Do we need more panels? Can we draw something? Can we do? It's a process of, it's like you have a big slab of marble and you're looking for the statue that's inside the marble. So you're just chipping away at the pieces and deciding, okay, well, this is what needs to be done. This is where it needs to be done. And it's really a lot of times a gut instinct, right? A lot of times you think, well, it would take them 3 seconds, but you wouldn't really know until you see it, until you do it. And it's a huge back and forth syncing up with the director to make sure that that everything is working cohesively, and that the story is being portrayed in a way that really informs theme and character motivations and what they're doing. It's a huge collaboration between the editor and director.
Yeah, I mean, like, and kind of along those lines, like with Arcane, Arcane approached the editing from a very sort of feature film idealism behind it. And when I say that, I mean, like, there was a lot of iteration. So you're not just cutting a scene just the one time. Like, you cut it one time. You guys, you being the editor, the director, and the producers, sit in a room together. You watch it, and then you brainstorm as to how you can make it better. And it's about iterating over and over again until you kind of perfect the timing and the feel and the moments in the scene before you elevate it to the next stage in production. So there's a lot of, like, as Ernesto was saying, there's a lot of chipping away at stuff to kind of get the finished polished piece at the end.
So I was curious about the professional side of how the editing section of show business works. So I'm familiar with the idea that for something like screenwriting, there are certain rules where if you're going to be credited on a project, you have to have written at least a certain amount of what ends up getting used. So even if you maybe wrote an earlier draft and bits of that are still there, or if you helped with rewrites, you might not get it officially credited. Is there anything equivalent to that or anything similar to that in the editing world?
I think it varies on show and project, right? I think that it depends on if it's a union project or a non-union project. It depends really on the people that are in charge of the project, right? Like, if
producer discretion, yeah.
Yeah, it's producer discretion, and say something from one episode or a previous cut of an episode is used in another episode way later, right? That was fully maybe edited by somebody else or partly edited by somebody else. It's really up to producer and producer discretion on how things are credited. Credits can be a little of a enigma sometimes on why people get credited what and why people don't. But I think it's all just discretion.
How did each of you get into editing professionally?
I mean, it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try and do the short version. The short version for me is it all actually started with me. I grew up on the East Coast, and I started off working, or not working, but studying kind of your traditional math and sciences and things like that. And my exposure to movies was really just watching movies with my family on a weekly basis. And it wasn't until I had to do a book report on Michael Crichton's Congo, where I grabbed my dad's 8mm camera, like get a rig 2 VCRs together, and essentially shot a book report instead of writing a book report, that I realized there was a lot of power behind editing a documentary piece and showing it to an audience of my classmates, my colleagues at that time. And so I kind of got hooked by that aspect. And so when I graduated from college, I drove out to LA and I paid my dues. I got coffees, I got lunches, I did all the PA runs and things like that. And I eventually sort of made connections and found my way onto an indie animated feature where at the age of 26, I was able to cut something together, in feature format. Yeah,
for me, it was a little bit different. I have a really strong martial arts background. I've been doing martial arts since I was 4 years old. And in high school, a buddy of mine was shooting his final project for film class. I didn't even know we had a film class or animation class in our high school. I went to Alexander Hamilton High School in Los Angeles. And at the end of it, I was a very small kid. I didn't have a growth spurt until way later. It was my 9th grade. And I thought holding the camera was really cool. But it was really big. And at the time we were using one of those like big beta cameras, like you will, like the news cameras, right? And he goes, well, why don't you come to the edit room and you can see us kind of put it all together. And I walk in, and it just so happened that a buddy of mine was the one editing it. And I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm editing. Do you want to try it? And he sat me down next on this computer. And we had just started using like Final Cut 1.1 or 1.0. I don't know. It was like the first version of Final Cut that was released. I mean, we still had a Moviola machine behind us where we'd cut film. And he sat me down. He gave me a bunch of footage. He taught me the basics. And I sat down, and all I remember was this was before the era of cell phones, right? And I sat down and I started working, and I look over, and he was sitting next to me. And I look over and he's gone. And then he burst through the door on the right-hand side. I was, oh my God, what are you doing? He goes, have you been here the whole time? I'm like, yeah. He goes, your mom is going crazy. She's looking for you. And it was like 6 p.m., and I had been in school sitting at this desk for hours, and I had started at like noon. And I realized then that this was something, I was a very hyper kid with like ADHD. And this was something that for whatever reason just honed me in and really let me focus on something that allowed all of these things in my head to just come out and all these things inside to just come out. And it was a kind of a realization like, oh, wow, this is different. This is something that even martial arts hasn't been able to do for me. And so, and the rest, I just a series of events and series of being in the right place at the right time and really putting in a lot of work that got me into higher profile editing stuff. And when I was, I think 26 years old, I became the youngest editor at that time that DreamWorks Animation had ever had, because I'd been putting in all this work and I got a really great opportunity through, I was working on How to Train Your Dragon, the series. And Chad Hammis, the producer, Art Brown and Doug Sloan, the showrunners, came to me and they were like, okay, we're promoting this director, Elaine Bogan, who actually just finished directing the Spirit movie for DreamWorks. And he was like, well, we're going to be promoting her to director and we want you to edit her first episode, but you have to continue doing all your other work. So it's sink or swim. I was like, okay. And, the rest is just, history from there. I was on that show for 6.5 years as the supervising lead editor on it. It was really great.
How did the two of you book Arcane on Netflix? And did you two know each other before you started working on this project?
We did not know each other. Actually, I was working on Dragons, and a buddy of mine, of both of ours, actually, strangely enough, who we had worked with in the past, came to me and was like, hey, I'm working on this show at Riot, and I put your name in the hat as an editor. They're looking for an editor. Do you want to check it out? And a lot of people say that, but it like never comes, it never turns into anything. And I was like, yeah, sure. And about a week later, I get a call from, at the time, he was a production supervisor. It was Marco Carrillo. And he goes, hey, I got your number from Stephen Meek. Would you like to come by and check this out? I was like, sure. I had spent 6.5 years editing, a show about dragons. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll check it out. This sounds interesting. I don't know what a video game company would be needing, an animation editor for, but I'll check it out. And I walked in, and I was blown away. Our showrunner and executive producer, Christian Link, I interviewed with him first, and he was just so different. It was such a different creative energy. And he played for me the audio for what ended up becoming the opening of episode 3, and which was originally the opening of episode 1. And it was just, it really, the first line of dialogue just grabbed me, and it was just so different. And so when I became an editor on the show, at some point we needed another editor, and Lawrence's name was thrown around, I believe, by Ash Brennan, who was one of the executive producers, directors, and writer originally on the show. And Lawrence walked in, and it was, I don't know, love at first sight, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so I at the time I was just wrapping up over at Warner Brothers, and kind of in the same. But I mean, Ernesto and I have been in the business for a while, but we'd never. I guess we'd always been like kind of ships in the night. We never actually worked on the same project. And so one of my, in the same way, I went to the Riot to interview with the team. Met Christian as well, which I have to echo Ernesto in that, like, the man is a mad genius, essentially. Like, he's just a very unique personality. And one of my favorite memories of that day when I went to meet with the team is Ernesto and I sat down, and kind of in that same zoned out way, I think we ended up spending, what was it, like 4 hours just chatting, essentially.
Yeah, we were there for like almost 9 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and it wasn't all like, work related. We just started chatting about things, because like we're all creatives, we're all kind of like geeks at heart, and so we started talking about like our favorite things, like animes and shows that we like to watch and things like that. And before you know it, it was 9 o'clock, and my wife was wondering where I was. So needless to say, like, we hit it off pretty well, and I ended up coming to work on the show. And it's one of my favorite things is I met a lot of people, Ernesto included, at Arcane, that were just really cool people to work with, and people that I still stay in touch with even after the show is done.
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence and a few of the, I would say actually a lot of the Arcane crew have now become some of my closest friends. I mean, Lawrence is the best man at my wedding. Like, we're that close. We're partners now in everything that we do. And another Jeremy Winslow is one of my groomsmen. He was a production manager on the show, and it's just I think Arcane was a very special group. It was Christian Link and Alex Yee did something that they created something that was so different, and not just in the show, but in the crew and the group of people that they kind of pulled together. They had the presence of mind to say, okay, we need this, we need this, we need this. Let's get the best people that we can possibly get to help us create such an amazing, thing that I think those who have seen it can really echo that. It's, you watch Arcane, even the first 3 episodes, and you're like, oh my God. Right.
Because, yeah. And like, the team, they created a team that was very team oriented. Like, it's a huge thing, not just on the show, but as the company as a whole. Like, the games that they create, they're all the emphasis is always on the teamwork that happens. And so I think that it was really important to them, not only to have, creative professionals who knew what they were doing, but people who ultimately ended up gelling well together and could work well together with their skills. So I mean,
yeah, and Riot and this particular team with Christian made it such a safe place for one to express themselves creatively. It was encouraged that if you had an idea, if you had an opinion, please voice it. It didn't matter if you were a director, an editor, or a production assistant and a coordinator, right? It was, if you see something that you, please voice that opinion. And it was a breath of fresh air to come into that, because we come from, Hollywood studio systems where, if a PA is in a meeting taking notes, depending on what the show is or what the movie is, if the PA were to speak up, there's a very high possibility that that person may be spoken to later about,
hierarchy is very important in a lot of places. So
yeah. And again, it depends, right? And it's but this was not that. This was something that we were both like, I'm sorry, what's this now? Like, you want people to do what? You want us to do what? Oh, okay. And it took a minute to be comfortable, because we were like, well, what if we do say something and somebody's like, all right, don't say that, And it was not that at all.
Again, I'm not a gamer, so I don't know anything about the source material, so I didn't have any type of expectations when watching it because I don't have that attachment where you're going, well, you have to do this or you can't leave
Yes.
this out or whatever. I'm just kind of like, I don't know what this is, so I'll just see what happens. I don't know.
I honestly wouldn't worry too much about that because, like, a lot of the, even though we all eventually became fans of the game as well, some of us joined without knowing anything about the game. It was obviously really important to the company that, that we adhere to the lore that was there. But that's the great thing about the show too, is that, like, I mean, I watched the premiere this past weekend, with some family members and such who have never played the game as well, and I think it's something that people can jump into even without knowing it. I mean, like, honestly, that's the true test of it, right? Like, if it was just made for, like, gamers, it would just be like a blip on the radar. But to really become something that globally can be ingested, and that's definitely their plan. Like, it's being streamed everywhere. Like, they need to make it something that can be enjoyed by a random Joe Schmo on the street. I mean, honestly, like, until we started working for Riot, we didn't really play the game a lot either. I mean, we were aware of it, but it wasn't like until after joining the show that we were like, oh, what is this game that this whole thing is based off of, kind of thing. So
right, yeah. I mean, and now we're so into the lore. I mean, we've deep dove into stories and backgrounds, and I think that Riot does such a great job in world building. And even though the stories don't really come into play very much, right? Because it's this like Moab, like top down, 5-on-5.
MOBA. It's MOBA.
MOBA. What did I say? Moab?
Moab, yeah. MOBA, MOBA, yeah.
That's a place in Arizona, I believe. Anyway,
I didn't know if this was one of those games that is heavily story driven, because I don't know anything about any video games unless they get adapted into some sort of live action thing, and then whatever I judge that for has nothing to do with the original source material. It's just whether or not it works on its own. So I wasn't sure if in creating the series, if there were any particular things that are basically being lifted from, I guess, a narrative that already existed in the game.
Well, I think it's part of that world building thing, right? Like we were saying, like Riot, our League of Legends, the game itself is just this 5v5, like MOBA top down, game. And while the sometimes little voiceover stuff comes into play in the game, the stories you don't really follow the story of each character the way that you would in some games. But Riot has done such a remarkable job with world building and writing these backgrounds for characters and these stories for these characters so that people do fall in love with these champions. And in Arcane, I think that I think Lawrence touched on this a little bit, which was it was a matter of not just making a show that fans would like, but a show that everyone could get into, even if you didn't know anything about these characters. It's about creating a compelling story and then being able for really like big fans to sprinkle things in that you're like, oh my God, that's this. Oh my God, that's that. And then fan theories left and right and all of this stuff. And, I even just today, I read a fan theory that I was like, oh wait, that's actually a very interesting theory that I hadn't even thought of. I don't think Lawrence had even thought of either. And we've been seeing this stuff for so long. And so I think that the video game adaptation to, shows and movies and things like that is very miss or miss. A lot of times I don't know that I can think of like one in particular that was like, oh my God, that was an incredible remake or an incredible adaptation.
We grew up with a lot of video game franchises that became movies that we were sadly disappointed in as kids and stuff like that. So for sure.
Yeah. And I think Arcane has really kind of, dealt that fatal blow to the misses of adaptations, because anybody who's watched it, I've gone through and deep dove into reviews and reactions and this and that, and even the fans who are so grumpy about everything that has to do with League, and they're so like, because it's something that people love so much, they get so invested in, and they've been asking for this for so long, and it's so easy to disappoint people because people want to see this, they want to see their champion, they want to see their character, they want this story to be explained. I think people went in with an expectation of like, I hope this is great, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And then they just started crying.
I mean, I think part of our, mentality going into the show was, look, we know there's going to be a lot of fan service needed in the sense of like people are going to be looking for those little like hidden Easter eggs and gems. But I think I can speak for Ernesto too, but the way we feel about it is that if by episode 3, you're still thinking about the Easter eggs and you're not caught up in the story of just Arcane itself, then I don't think we've done our job. Like we were definitely working towards a story and a show, with Christian, with the directors and everyone, so that, yeah, you might enter and watch the show because you want to see, little Easter eggs, but you'll fall in love with the characters so much that it'll become secondary for you at some point. Right. That's the hope.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I can think of that's from a video game that I actually really love, despite not knowing anything about the source material, is Warcraft, the movie. I love that movie. I will defend it. I did a whole video essay on it, and Duncan Jones watched it, and he, like, I said a thing. I was like, I'm pretty sure that this was this, based on just little things that were being hinted at. It had to do with somebody was somebody's father, and they didn't explicitly state it in the film, but I felt like it was very obvious in the subtext. And he watched the video and he replied to me on Twitter and said, "Yeah, you're right." And I was like,
"That's amazing!
That's so great!"
I knew it. Yeah, it was a whole thing. But another thing that I wanted to ask about on a more technical side. So for live action editing, color grading is a really big, important part of the process. Do you two have to do anything with color grading when you're editing, or is that all done by the animators and then you just use whatever they've given?
Well, so neither. So the animators are animators, lighters are lighters, right? And so in animation, the animator is literally just animating. And it's actually really funny because I think a lot of people believe that Arcane did a lot of motion capture, like mocap, and we didn't. It's all animated by hand. And the lighters do a lighting pass that is all cohesive when they're lighting the scenes. But there is a DI process at the end with a color correct artist where we all sit down in a room with color correct monitors, and then they go in and do, just like in a feature, just in like live action, they do a color pass and any treatments and things that, to add to a scene. And if something is too hot, too dark, they play with those colors and that lighting.
Yeah, I mean, like something that is often a misconception is people don't often realize just how specialized jobs can become in the movie industry. And I think even more so to some extent in the animation industry, because that finished shot that you're seeing with the character jumping and punching, like it passes through so many hands. Like every individual frame passes through so many different creative hands to finally get that polished looking image that you see. So it's never, under rare occasions, would it ever be a single person. Honestly, I think that's only just for like smaller budget or indie scenarios. When you're talking about things like Arcane, where you really want to hit that high level quality, people are brought in with specializations that just do that one thing and they make it look great.
Yeah, like Lawrence and I we do have a pretty big skill set, right? Like, for example, like I've been a compositor before, like I've done VFX before, we can do color correction and lighting. Like I've been on projects before where I've had to do the color correction on something, or I've had to do, even on Arcane, like we helped a little bit with some VFX stuff as well. And it's stuff where the more right, depending on the project and what it is, the more you have to bring to the table and the more you have to offer in a skill set that in a pinch you can help. But on Arcane, we didn't do the DI and the color process. We had a place and a color correct DI artists who did all that stuff with us in the room. Sometimes earlier on for like episode 1, you know, we were in the DI checking to make sure that everything was good with the showrunners and the directors from Fortige, which were amazing, by the way. But yeah.
I mean, I think part of also being a professional editor is sort of knowing that this can be better than the rough pass that I'm doing, right? Like part of our job is telling the production crew is like, all right, I'm going to get it to this point. For instance, like Ernesto and I often do temp sound and temp music when we're putting together episodes. But I know for a fact that, you know, I should hand this off to a music editor, to a dialogue editor, to a sound effects editor, so that they can really like dive into it at a level that would just take up too much of my time, essentially.
Stepping outside of Arcane a little bit, Lawrence, you directed the film Love Arcadia, which is largely starring Asian diaspora performers. I didn't actually have time to watch the film, but I did try to at least do some research on the two of you.
Thanks.
So can you share a bit about working on that project? I read the general synopsis, but again, I haven't seen the full thing.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a passion project for me. So like you said, it was a primarily Asian American cast. It's a romantic comedy set in Arcadia, California, which is very close to where I live. And me and a couple of old colleagues set out to make the movie. One, because, you know, that's what you do when you come out to Los Angeles, right? Or to Hollywood. You want to make cool things with your friends, essentially. Like that's kind of the dream. And then two, like for someone like myself, you know, growing up, I didn't really get to see a lot of people who looked like me on screen, especially in romantic roles at that. And so I really wanted to, you know, direct a movie where we got to see an Asian American male, you know, portrayed in what I would consider to be just a normal, you know, could have been anybody kind of role. Sorry, there's no kung fu, there's no like mystical ancient Chinese arts or anything like that. It's just a boy falling in love with a girl. And, you know, that's what we set out to do.
Do you have aspirations to do more directing?
Yeah, I mean, Ernesto and I actually have a couple of projects in development right now. We have, you know, 3 animated series that we're developing, a kids book, and then a sci-fi project as well. And I mean, we're definitely looking to, you know, find homes for them, and then ultimately like either run the shows or direct them ourselves. But yes, for sure. Like I think everyone offers a unique voice, and for me and Ernesto being of, you know, different sort of like minority backgrounds, I think we can definitely bring a very unique perspective to stories here.
Yeah, because Ernesto, I was going to ask if you wanted to elaborate a bit more on your further aspirations. I guess the two of you, your aspirations are a bit intertwined then, instead of me asking separately.
Yeah, I've had I want to say the luck and privilege of being able to direct and write on some great things. Like even when I was on Dragons, I got the chance to direct on some episodes, kind of ghost direct, if you will. And recently soloed a feature animated script that my brother and actually Ash Brennan got to write. And so with Lawrence, you know, I've partnered up and we've started working on some really, really exciting projects. And I want to continue to flex that director muscle and that writer muscle, you know, and Arcane really kind of jump started us together. And it's just been, you know, there's like no brakes on this ride now, you know, we're like, hey man, how about this? Like, this is a great idea. Let's do this. Let's work on this. And we've just been kind of snowballing into this thing. And yeah, it's super exciting. And Lawrence is right. I think we come with two very, I think, unique voices that aren't really heard a lot in the industry. You know, I'm Hispanic, and Lawrence is you know, Asian, and I think that it's a Hispanic demographics and Asian demographics aren't super represented in the industry, really. And there are some great people out there that do represent us. But I don't think that there is enough representation of these voices, and it's something that we want to bring to these different genres and these different worlds.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I'm sure you can see that I also am Asian, so I definitely get the concept. I think also it's just important for more creative people to just create things that just interest them and spark their creative passion, as opposed to I really don't like watching things that are trying to market diversity and you can tell there's a very clear corporate plan at play. Like you can see the puppet strings in that. I mean, maybe, okay, to be fair, the general masses are probably not that cynical about the industry. So to them, they're probably just like, oh, it's a person who kind of looks like me and that's fine. But I guess for me personally, if I can see the puppet strings, then it immediately puts me off. And then I almost don't even want to watch the thing because I'm like, I'm not stupid. Don't condescend to me as a viewer. Like, just because you put an Asian woman, or not even just an Asian woman, but anybody who's an underrepresented group. But if I can tell that you're just trying to sell something, then I don't want to watch it. But that's probably just me.
No, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I had a conversation with a friend just last week about this, and it's like, there's definitely a place for those kinds of movies, right? The ones that like put, like, for lack of a better word, like that put like racism or diversity at the forefront of the purpose of the picture. And so I'm definitely not knocking them. I think there's definitely a reason why those should continue to be made. For me, and I think it sounds like for you as well, the thing that resonates with me is that until we can have movies where it just is, right? Like it's not the reason the movie is being made, but it just is. You just have a female, like a strong female cast, or you just have a diverse cast, and that's just the way it is. Until that becomes the norm, I think that's going to be the struggle. Until like future generations can essentially just watch a movie that has these things and accept that as the norm, that will constantly be, I think, the goal that, speaking for myself, the goal that I would have as far as making movies go.
But I think, to speak a little bit on what you said, I don't know. I feel like audiences are becoming a little bit more savvy, a little bit smarter. It's like you can't just throw anything in front of them now, and they're just like, yeah, right on. There is just so many different outlets for people to receive media and receive information from. I think people are becoming a little bit more aware when they're being represented in a way that isn't genuine, that isn't coming from a place of actually representing people, as opposed to just hammer fisting something into a show or into a movie for the sake of checking a diversity box, right? Mm-hmm. When it's done right, when it's done for a reason, you feel a little bit more represented. You feel listened to and spoken for, as opposed to just being thrown in as for charity. And I think people are getting really savvy and smart on that now, and it's a little harder to get one around somebody now. Just like you, like, I mean, you're more in the industry than most people are, but like you said, you can tell, right? You can tell when somebody's trying to manipulate a feeling and an emotion, or somebody's trying to just do something for the sake of doing it, as opposed to actually being represented. And I think a lot of people are getting that now.
I also want to call out too, like, there's a unique challenge here too, right? Because I mean, for instance, like, there are a lot of, just to take the Asian angle again, there's a lot of content out there right now on streaming. For instance, like Squid Games, right? Like that was a Korean show that got a huge amount of coverage. But there's a unique aspect because a lot of our experiences growing up weren't specific. Like, for instance, I'm Asian, but I'm not Asian, just Asian. I'm Asian American, and I have a very specific set of experiences growing up being Asian American. And even though Squid Games was an Asian show, it doesn't encapsulate my experience as an Asian American. So there's a very challenging aspect to this, where in that I think a lot of the stories that we potentially would like to see and aren't being told are very specific to minority groups growing up in the U.S. as opposed to the same ethnicities in other parts of the world.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because I've been brainstorming a lot of story ideas of stuff that I want to, start expanding into full screenplays once I start my classes and know more about just the technical mechanics of, how to format a screenplay, as opposed to just knowing the story in your head. And for me, when I envision the worlds that I want to create and the characters that I want to create, you know, it's never it's never that singular pursuit of diversity. To me, it's just like, well, there's a lot of different types of people in the world, and it just kind of arises more organically. Like, one of the stories in my head, you know, I have a very specific, like, these aren't just generic Latin American stereotypes of, like, they're from a specific country, and stuff that has happened historically in that country informs like why they're now in the States. And like, even if you don't overly elaborate on it, I'm like, there's a reason for it, and it makes sense, like, relative to why they're going to behave a certain way. And
Yes.
you know, it's just stuff like that where you know, I just feel like I do not have any interest in wasting my viewing hours on just kind of, oh, well, Asians are like this, and Latinos are like this, and you know, all of that. I'm like, but they're not. Like, there's a lot of countries in Latin America, and like, they all have different histories, and like, when they're more likely to have immigrated because of things that happen.
That's right. People are dependent upon, you know, people like you who actually have their own stories to tell them, because not everyone has had the same experience that you've had, you know, growing up. So that's exactly what we're talking about. You're touching on the immigrant aspect too, right? Like, there's a difference between, you know, people in those countries and the immigrants in the United States. And like, I think those two often get very confused for people who aren't of immigrant descent or background, right? So it's like, yeah. I hear you. Like, it's a very real story.
Yeah. And because I don't really relate to Asian Americans in that like label, because I like, all my family's still in Japan. Like, so for me, I'm like, okay, that's why I said diaspora, where I'm like, I'm Japanese diaspora, or like, I'm just Japanese, I'm Asian, but I don't relate to American culture. Because to me, it's like, it's different if you're Japanese and your grandparents came here and they were interned and whatever, then you feel differently about, like, you're more like intertwined into it in a way that I
so
just
complicated.
don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will just jump to the last question now, which is, would the two of you be kind enough to tease anything for fans of the show or of the game to look forward to, of what's coming up in the season?
Without, I mean, spoiling anything, I think that fans are going to be very excited to see, you know, their favorite characters portrayed in the way that they've always wanted to see them. Questions answered, I think, that they've always had, like, what happened, you know, why, and there's definitely a good amount, I think, of fan service, if you know, and that's going to make a lot of people very, very, very happy.
Yeah, I'll say Ernesto and I have enjoyed a great deal watching the reviews and the theories online, and some of you got them correct. Some of them you haven't got it quite correct, but it's been very enjoyable. Like, we really love seeing how much everyone's enjoying and the show, and how passionate they are about these characters that Riot has created. So
yeah, fan theories are super funny, right? Because to a certain degree, you have to be kind of in the loop on lore and the world building of League of Legends and these characters, and so even from like a trailer, people are, you know, deciphering code, and sometimes it's like impressive. Sometimes you're like, dude, you're so off, it's not even funny. And so, but
they like frame through these things. Like, speaking as an editor, like, I would go crazy framing through the amount of times that these guys go through framing through like individual pixels and circling like tiny little things. I'm just like, what do you guys? Just watch the show. You'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it that much more if you just sit back, relax, and watch the show. So
yeah, well, that's just the evolution of fan culture because of the internet, because obviously all three of us growing up, we didn't have YouTube to download trailers from and then just very slowly scrub through things. That wasn't a thing. We would have those funny, goofy narrators being like, in a world, and you know, they would explain everything beat by beat, like, this is who this character is, this is what the story is, go see it, it's out on this date. So yeah,
right, yeah. Like, imagine trying to press pause on a single frame of a VCR, like with the static.
The interlaced frames. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, the story is very grounded and rooted in things that I think people can really relate to, right? Especially right now, the haves, the have-nots, and the struggle of the people sometimes caught between. And Arcane does a really great job in building these relationships with these characters and really letting these moments breathe. And a lot of times the relationships between the people that have and the people that don't, and those relationships are so meaningful and they become so important. And they're portrayed in a way that really lets you feel for these characters, right? And some of these fan reactions that I've seen over the last 2 days, even of episode 3, the finale of this week's drop of chapter 1, was I watched a guy just sit here and cry, and he's not a league player. He just was, really into the show, and all these comments of people, and it's very fulfilling to see. And we're just excited for everybody to see what's coming up the next 2 weeks, because it's gonna be pretty ridiculous.
Well, Arcane is available to stream on Netflix, and new episodes are being released on a weekly basis. So if anyone is watching this and has not already, make sure that you check it out. And thank you so much to Lawrence and Ernesto for taking time to speak with me.
Thank you for having us. We really had a great time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.